there's the quote like, be ready when the luck comes. I think it's really important to say like, okay, maybe someday I'd like to work for this specific company, but just like actually focusing on your craft so that when they come knocking, you are ready for that opportunity and you can really deliver something of quality that is like what they are looking for. I feel like especially earlier in my career, I just wasn't ready for some of the really cool opportunities I got. I just think it's so important to like really focus on being the best version of you and like your craft to be able to deliver for people when they come knocking.
So hello everyone and welcome back to Open Studio. Today I'm joined by Tuesday Bassen, an award-winning illustrator and designer based in Berlin. Her work is influenced by underground comic book art and often features women and girls in powerful, dominant and confident positions. She is the founder of Tuesday of California, a size-inclusive clothing line that focuses on deadstock and European-made materials. Tuesday also runs Berlin Chainstitch, a custom embroidery studio using vintage machines. Her client list includes Google, the New York Times, Snapchat, the New Yorker, Target, Chronicle Books, and the United Nations. Tuesday, I'm so happy to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm so great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here too.
It's so funny that we are sitting in the same city, but in just 1 kilometer apart.
I know, yeah, so close, and yet so far.
This is what COVID-19 made to all of us. We rather stay behind our screens. But I'm really happy to join you in this conversation. I would love to start with your story and when all the stories that have to do with how you started as an artist, how you developed your clothing line. So let's start by the beginning. How did things begin for you as an artist? When did you had that first spark?
So I grew up in Nebraska, which is like a very blue collar kind of farming state. And the city that I'm from is like a university town, and the school system is like pretty progressive and interesting. And there are focus programs within the high school system. And initially when I started high school, I was really heavy into speech and debate and was doing like a lot with like civics. And I was just really interested in politics and like pursuing maybe political science. And then I joined the arts and humanities focus program that my school system had as a public school system or like a public program. And I don't think I realized before I joined that program that it was even an option to be an artist or to be a designer as like a full-time job. So once I joined that program, I feel like it sort of, the brakes were kind of hit and I was like, wait a second, I could be doing that. And I changed gears from pursuing political science as a teenager to being interested in art. And I pretty much laser focused on going to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I think that was the only school I applied to because in my teenage mind, I was like, it's there or nowhere. And I applied to the illustration and design program.
And how do you come about developing your style? Because you have a signature style that has to do first with the topics that you draw, and also, of course, the media that you use to create your illustrations. So I wonder how did that come together? And of course, that normally is a process that it goes in a span of many years. But if you could pinpoint some of the key moments that led you to develop your style and choose the topics that you talk about with your art, what would those be?
Well, in terms of artistic influences, I'm really inspired by, or at least, I still am, but when I was a teenager, Julie Doucet, who is a Canadian comic book artist, was like a huge inspiration to me and influence to me. And she had a comic book series called Dirty Plot, which is like I think in French, essentially like dirty cunt. And it just was like autobiographical and like kind of raunchy, but also like funny and so smart and candid. I really just was captured by that as a teenager. There was another female comic book artist called Dame Darcy that did like a lot more kind of dark and whimsical things, like more fantasy. But I was also super captured by her style and just how unique it was. And she did a lot of the like hyper flat kind of shading where like everything looks a bit shiny. And I think also being like a child of the 90s, like all of the like cartoons that we grew up with were a huge influence. And I feel like it was mimicking a lot of those styles that I saw with like heavy line work, just like simplified design. In terms of the content, my grandmas are very proud feminists. And I feel like as I was growing up, it was like a very common theme for me that we would, you know, like talk about things that women could do. And also like my grandma Vicky was a female journalist at a time where there weren't really many female journalists. And I remember, you know, growing up with a lot of like feminist slogan mugs in their house, but also, you know, like her Nebraska Press Women mugs and just like them being really proud of what they were able to achieve in a time when that was not celebrated. I remember when I was younger, they used to coach me to say, you know, when people would ask what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I was really into insects as a kid. And they would really coach me to say that I wanted to be a feminist entomologist. And I feel like I was just indoctrinated into this lifestyle. But I also think drawing has always been a great way for me to like challenge or channel feelings of like, you know, anger or sadness or frustration in like a more healthy way. And so I feel like I end up having a lot of drawings that are maybe a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's a little bit more raw emotion sometimes in my drawings as like a good, healthy outlet.
I mean, it is so interesting to understand where this is coming from. You know, hearing you say that you had feminist grandmas, which is something really particular, really special for the 90s, especially, right?
Yeah,
Right now, we
absolutely.
talk a lot about this, but back then especially to have a grandma who was a feminist, that's super unique. And
Yeah.
I can
And
totally understand.
also my grandmas are a couple. So, you know, not only were they very outwardly feminist, but also out lesbians in a time where like that wasn't accepted. I guess only as out as they could be. Like I think in the professional setting, they were not out because it could endanger their jobs. But yeah.
You know, you mentioned that you use, and perhaps you still do, use your art as a way of channeling certain feelings of frustrations or of frustration or things that you cannot express otherwise. What would be those things? Or can you remember some of the things that you feel back then that you channel through your drawing and your art? Or specific
I
things
feel
that you
like
experience that perhaps were like, okay, I cannot talk about this, or it's hard for me to talk about this, but I can do it through my art.
I feel like less when I was like a younger person or a teenager, and more when I was like a young adult, maybe college and also out of college. I think I was experiencing like a lot of the same feelings of like depression and anxiety that a lot of people maybe is inherent to being like a young person out on their own, but also maybe is specific to me and my brain chemistry. But I think until I really started going to therapy and figuring out how to talk about being just a person with feelings,
Yeah.
it was like a really great outlet for me. And then I think now it's, you know, it's a lot easier for me. I think also because I understand kind of emotions and how to express yourself in a healthy way, because I think for a long time that was hard for me. Like it was hard for me to like have a respectful conversation and still be like emotionally charged. Whereas now I think it is a lot easier because I have those tools, but maybe felt under-equipped in those areas for a while.
Yeah, and if I remember back to my teenage years, I think that's the challenge of that time, that you have all these feelings and you're feeling all the feelings, but you still have no tools to actually express them. And as you grow up and perhaps do some personal work or go to therapy, you learn tools to help you channel those things through conversations, through telling people how you feel. But I think it is such a great tool to have art and drawing as a way of channeling that. And I just wonder, as you tell me this, I'm trying to picture in my head, how did those drawings look? What was the visual result of those, of channeling those emotions? Can you describe that in some way? Of course, it will be, perhaps it will be suitable to show those drawings, but since we don't have them and we have our listeners listening to us, I wonder, how did that look like, if you can express it in words?
Well, I remember like a specific drawing when I had first graduated from college, and I drew like two women in a store, and one said like, fuck you, I found it first, or something like that. And then she was like, kind of elbowing the other one in the nose. So, like maybe it wasn't specifically about the sweater. It might have actually been about a sweater. Now that I'm saying that out loud, I think I remember like an eBay purchase though, where I had just missed it. But I feel like feeling kind of all of these like pent up feelings. And yeah, I think my work used to be a lot more violent when I was younger. And yeah.
It's super interesting to understand that story behind that drawing, even though you're explaining it in words, but I can totally imagine feeling the frustration of wanting something and wanting to buy that on eBay and then not getting it, and just imagine this, or picturing this situation of two women fighting over an item at the supermarket. I wonder, how did you later find a commercial outlet for this? And I'm asking you this because oftentimes I think that illustrators and designers and lettering artists as well, they think that they have to fit a certain stereotype, or populate their portfolios with a variety of different projects, and they should be commercial enough, quote unquote, so that they get hired for doing creative work. And listening to you and to the topics that you touch on in your art, it seems that it's very personal, and at the same time you are making a living as a commercial artist. So I wonder, how did you find that first commercial outlet for your work?
That is such a great question. And I think I have thought about, especially like having graduated with a degree in like a commercial art, illustration and graphic design. I feel like there are kind of two tracks that one can take as like a commercial artist. You can either be kind of like a person of all trades, and you can show that you're able to, mimic XYZ style, and you can kind of be fit in wherever. And that makes you more attractive to like a corporate setting, because you can kind of do anything. And I think then you're more likely to get hired in-house for something that like an agency role. Or like I also saw that, with illustrators, like people with portfolios like that, where, you can show a range of styles, were more likely to get hired by like Cartoon Network. Obviously, the industry is changing so rapidly, that's maybe not like the right analogy anymore. But so that is one track. I feel like the other track is to be so yourself and invest so deeply into like a specific vision or art style that is like completely different. I think that there are a lot of pluses to that. If you're interested in being hired for Martina Floor, the person who does this specific thing, Tuesday Bassen, that does this specific thing, I think it can also be exhausting, because then, you are you as a person, but then you're also you as this entity. And yeah, I think it can be a little complicated to figure out like what your boundaries are with that. But for me, I feel like I was kind of lucky, because so many people in my family are entrepreneurs. Like my dad is a dog trainer. My mom owned a pottery studio. My grandma was a therapist, but owned her own practice. And like, my grandpa has like, or not my grandpa. Well, my grandpa had a wine store, and my uncle had like a Krav Maga studio. And it's like, there are all these very disparate things, but this, I feel like we were lucky in the idea that it's like, you can do it. It is possible to own your own business. It's not so scary or impossible. People have done it before. And I think I took that attitude into illustration. And I feel like I would say I graduated in 2011. And I feel like at the time I was seeing a lot of illustration in like a commercial setting in terms of like gift stores, but it was usually through a third party company, like say Blue Q was like hiring an artist then to do this thing. But then there were also artists like Shag, just like kind of like a faux beatnik style through the 90s lens, but just like all of these different like entities, like artist entities that had their own brand and licensing that I remember as a
I
kid.
know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like seeing in a gift store. And I feel like when I graduated, I kind of took that idea with me and pretty much instantly started like selling products, you know, at the time, I think on a much smaller scale, like tote bags, ceramics, prints. But then by 2015, I was living in New York when I graduated, but by 2015, I moved to LA, and LA was really exciting to me because LA is like a city that never stops. Like it just keeps going and going and going. And there's like, I feel like there's kind of opportunities forever if you're like looking, if you are interested in making something, there is somebody that has a business to help you make it. Like, you know, just the amount of workshops and stuff is really amazing. Like, if you want to have neon made, there's somebody, you know, in one of the LA suburbs that can definitely do it, that has a workshop. And I think that's one of the most magical things about LA, or like what really drew me to it at the time. And around that time, I was really like, I had started this zine called Ugly Girl Gang that was a lot of these like women in powerful positions, also like women being kind of violent and it being just exciting, and kind of like taking back this power. And I feel like so often we don't see women in these powerful positions. It's, you know, instead like violence being inflicted upon women. And at the time that was like very exciting to me. And I had drawn this image of three women in matching satin jackets. And when I moved to LA, I like found people who worked in clothing manufacturing and made these satin jackets as like a limited edition product. So like a clothing item based on my illustration work. And then, I don't know, I feel like I feel like something clicked for me where I was like, ooh, this is like so satisfying, where it's like, it's creative, but it's also analytical. There's so many different hats you have to wear, and that's really exciting. You get to kind of create this universe and control this narrative, like, you know what I mean? It's not just about the clothes. You can kind of create everything surrounding them. You can, you know, interesting photo shoots and like art, you know, just all of these different like aspects. It felt like kind of the ultimate, like gallery show. And that's how I really felt about it. So leading up to making clothes, you know, I was doing, pins, enamel pins in 2015 when they were kind of at the height of popularity. I remember when I started doing enamel pins, and, you know, initially I had like maybe $150 to my name, and 50 of those dollars went to making the first batch of enamel pins.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, okay, you know, then it like really changed my life. And, you know, so I had completely left them out, but that really funded being able to even make those first clothing samples in the first place, because I was using the money that I made from selling enamel pins.
That's so great, because it seems that there are so many things that you mentioned that I would love to like revisit. First, the fact that there's like two tracks for making a living as an illustrator, which is, you know, becoming that person of all trades, where you are an expert and a skilled person that has the skill of drawing in a lot of different styles, for a lot of different purposes. Or the other track, which is the one you chose, is to become really unique in your style, in the topics that you touch, and your voice. And within that path, you also have the opportunity to build your own brand, which is what you did by starting to sell products, tote bags, ceramics, prints, which also led to create a series of pins that then the sales of those pins helped you finance your clothing project. It is what is today Tuesday of California. It was the
Yep.
first step towards building that brand.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so great, because also I feel that oftentimes we think that building a brand has to do with first having tons of funds to, produce the products, distribute them, and all of that. And it seems that your experience was rather step by step. So you first created that first item, which was the jackets, if I
Hmm.
wrote down correctly.
Yeah.
And you started to expand from there. How was that process? So you had those first jackets produced with your illustration. What did you do with them?
So I had made the sample and then I put them up for pre-order.
Hmm.
And one thing that you mentioned was that, like, I think a lot of times when we think about starting a business, you think of like presenting one whole collection all at once. But I think it's so important to like work within your means,
Mm.
like maybe, like when I started doing pins, like I had $150.
Yeah.
But just taking things step by step and saying like, okay, this might be a stretch, but I can reliably commit $50 or whatever. But with satin jackets, it's such with clothes, it's so expensive.
Mm.
To develop a pattern, to make a sample, to source fabric. And so I think it's good to be realistic and say like, okay, maybe this thing cost me, I think with clothing, it could be anywhere between 400 to 6,000 for a piece to develop, depending on like who you're using to work with for like, cause you have to make industrial patterns. It's not just, if you're sewing them yourself, you can draw your own pattern. But even though I can sew, I was not interested in that being my full-time job either. So, you're hiring somebody who is an industrial pattern maker. You're hiring somebody to do sizing. That's called a grader.
Mm.
You're sourcing the fabric, you're making a sample, and you're also sourcing the other materials. So, it just depends on the set labor costs of the people that you're working with. Because sometimes there's like a one-stop shop that you can go to do all of those things. They're going to be more expensive because it's their, basically their job then becomes to manage all of these different things, versus if you're doing it, then you're managing all of these different people. So when I made my first sample, then I was like, I had just put it online. At that point, I had like, developed a small following and asked if anybody was interested in pre-ordering these, or announced that there was going to be a pre-order. And I think we sold like 50 for the first pre-order. And then, and then I shipped them out. I remember I have all of these pictures still of like my boyfriend at the time's RAV4 just filled with pink little boxes of like shipping them. And I remember taking pictures like at the post office and like just how proud I felt of that and how exciting that was. And then we did like a second run of them and a third run in a different color. And then in 2016, I did my first like actual release with like or I won't say actual release, typical release with multiple items in the release, and a photo shoot, because before it was just me, pictures on me.
That's so good. I love the fact that you did. You first had that pre-order coming in, which financed the actual production of the items. And oftentimes, I think this is a great framework for everybody listening, because oftentimes we think, as you said, we think that we need to have the entire collection presented to the world with the products produced and an inventory and all that stuff. This is actually what I did when I launched my a small line of products. I think it was 2016 or something like this. And we did that. We created the product in a vacuum. So let's say we sat down and we produced the things that we thought people would want. And when we launched the product line, we actually discovered what people wanted, because the things that sold were the things that people wanted. The things that didn't sell then were the things that people were not interested in, although we thought they would be interested in. So it's always such a great way of going about it, to ask your audience what do they want, whether they will buy it, and ask them to make a commitment upfront so that you can produce that for them. And then when you have the funds, go about building the entire line if you want. Do you also continue to use that type of framework nowadays that you already have a brand and a collection?
Yeah, so this is the 10th year of the brand now. We took like a 2-year break when I moved to Germany because I
Mm.
was like, I don't know how this is going to go. I need some time to like settle in and figure it out. So yeah, we've done all sorts of things. Like I think like you and like I'm sure so many people who launch a brand, like you want it to be beautiful. You want it
Mm.
to be the best it can be. And I feel like at times I felt insecure about, working on a pre-order model, because then you're asking people to wait for production time, which is usually about 3 months. It could
Mm.
be shorter, it could be longer, but that's realistically it. And you're asking for a lot of faith from people. I think I would say around like 2018, 2019, the brand just got bigger and bigger and I had multiple employees and I really felt like if I want to be able to scale, I should try a more traditional model. I kind of tried, like I would go back and forth where I would be like ready to ship, then some things would be pre-order, and then I just kind of dabbled, and ultimately, like, you had said, like, people think of brands as something where you have to have a ton of money and you like go into it and it's 100% done. And like, even though I knew that that wasn't right for me, it's still so attractive to, like go that route. And so, yeah, I think that's how a lot of brands end up shutting down too, because
Mm.
you overcommit. You've got too much stuff. Sometimes you order the wrong things and you really think a customer will like this, and then ultimately they don't, and you're stuck with this. And I was really feeling burnt out for a
Mm.
while because of that, because I felt like, with clothing, you're suddenly talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of inventory.
Yeah.
And that can be really scary if you are just an individual. Like a lot of clothing
Yeah.
brands have some sort of financial backing. But if you're just an individual, that's a lot of money, and like a lot could go wrong personally for me if, it didn't go well. So I was really glad to have those 2 years to like sit back and kind of think about how I wanted the clothing brand to run and like what it meant to
Mm.
me. And also like we had always put emphasis on like California made materials and dead stock, but we also experimented with producing in China because I firmly believe that, ethical production can happen anywhere and like sweatshop production can happen anywhere. And I felt that especially with how things were going in the US in like 2021, 2022, that we needed to diversify like out of the US. And that was awesome. But then it also did mean that we were like investing in more product to really
Mm.
make it viable and worth it, because then we're working on a different scale, basically. And I'm glad I had the 2 years to kind of step back, because I was like, wait, actually, I don't think that this is right for me. I am way more interested in doing small batches. I am really concerned about the environment and the clothing, like the impact
Mm.
that clothing has on the environment. How can I make this work in a way that really aligns with my personal views on, like how a business should run, and, how we can be as thoughtful as possible.
Mm.
So yeah, we just relaunched the brand like a month and a half ago.
Mm.
And we did like Italian dead stock for the first 3 pieces. And then we did a made in Spain, organic, certified, all the good stuff you would ever want, checker fabric. And then our clothes are being made in Berlin.
Mm, that's amazing.
And
So this is a great moment actually to share the piece that you sent to me for the Art in Focus section, which is one of the sections of our podcast where we showcase one piece of work of yours and we talk about it. And I have it right here. I'm gonna share my screen so that we can talk about it. So I assume that this is part of the new line or the new collection. Is that right?
I don't know, we'll see. I don't remember what I sent you anymore. Oh, no, this is not from the new collection, but I did think that this was interesting to talk about, because another thing that had been sort of like catching my interest
Yeah.
is quilting. And I released this design as a quilt pattern in 2020 for free during
Mm.
COVID, just to be like, hey, everybody, I'll teach you how to quilt since not all of us were at home, but a lot of us were at home. And then later printed that quilt design on a top. But I thought it was sort of interesting to represent where we headed with like some of the cross design things I was doing.
That's so cool. And why did you choose this particular piece of work? What were you occupied with at the time when you did this?
When I designed the quilt, or
Yes.
all of it.
Why did you choose this particular piece of work, like to represent the work that you do?
That's a great question. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've been a little less interested in doing illustration.
Mm.
I think I got quite burnt out. I had like a kind of a public lawsuit years ago against a fast fashion company, and who had like allegedly stolen a bunch of my work, and it really affected me negatively. And I feel like clothing was good at the time because I could kind of be creative in a different way. But then I feel like quilting, especially in 2020, it's something that I grew up doing with my grandma, kind of doing it on my own and like rediscovering my creativity in that way felt really good and healing, especially after I felt kind of sad that I was not enjoying drawing anymore.
Do you feel that it was a key factor? This lawsuit that you went through was a key factor to lose the joy in drawing. I don't know the
Absolutely.
details of that lawsuit, what they took from you, but perhaps you want to share that with us.
I think there is like a legal limit to how much I'm allowed to talk about, but
All right. Yeah.
if anybody's interested in Googling it, it's very public.
Yeah.
But basically, like a catalog of work that I had produced, a lot of my pins, were produced on clothing without my consent. As like printed items or embroidered items on clothing. It's demoralizing when you sort of like when you're making something and you feel good about it and you put it out in the world, it's so exciting. And suddenly having to spend so many of my own resources to like defend this thing that I had made just sucked. And I felt like I just kind of sucked the joy out of it for me. So I feel like clothes were really positive for me because then I could kind of continue to like work in my own way, but have some space and distance from like visual art as I had been doing it. So yeah, this piece, it's sort of interesting because when you said art and focus and I sent this to you, I was like, I really like this piece. And I feel like I still do. I think in part because it feels a little more sophisticated than some of not to say that my work, it's graphic, it's cartoony, and I think this represents like another side of design that I'm interested in that I felt like I didn't really let myself explore in the past. And I really enjoyed putting this on this top and just like seeing it shine and people responding to it, especially because I felt, it feels yucky to not want to do the thing that like you were once best known for. And so to see it like something else also be interesting to people made me feel really good too.
That's so great. I think I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. I cannot imagine really how it must feel to, as you said, to have someone just deliberately use your stuff and you having to go out and defend it when it's like you didn't do anything. And I can imagine how that sucks all the energy out of you. And I think it's so great also the fact that you allow yourself to be artistic or to express your art through another media like clothing and still put it out there in the world. I think oftentimes building a brand or building a style as an artist can be a great catalyst for success, for getting clients, for getting assignments, for being recognized. And at the same time, oftentimes it can become this little box in which you are put into. And whenever you want to do something different, you feel that people want to accept it. And you, even as an artist, you don't allow yourself to get out of that box. And I think it was really courageous from you to do that, to just go on a different route, and also to go on a different route in terms of graphics, because this is, as you said, is still graphic, and it still has a lot of elements of the work that you do, the illustrations, but at the same time it is different. It's geometrical, it's a very rational in a way, and also it still is very empowering of women. It represents a woman that is really powerful and is straightforward and stands up for herself. So, it has a lot to do with you, your values, but at the same time, it's like a different outlet for your creativity. We always speak about this. Like, I always say that, no matter how much you invest in a piece of work, once you ship it, you will probably look at it in 2 months or 2 days, and you will probably find something to change. So what are the things that you love, that you think you nailed in this piece of work? And what are the things that you would change?
It's interesting because I often feel like, oh man, I wish I would have done XYZ differently. But I feel like oftentimes with like making clothing, I spend so long in the fitting process that I feel like, maybe later I'll change the shape of a pocket or something. But I usually walk away feeling very proud of
Mm,
like what we achieved. And that actually makes me feel really good to say out loud. I didn't realize that I really felt that way, but I am really proud of what we do. And I look at this shirt and I think about how it makes me feel to wear it.
yeah.
Um, and I think about like one of the best things to me is when women say, or people who wear our clothes say, it makes me feel like a main character.
Mm,
And I think really what that means is like, it makes me feel confident and interesting and considered. And I feel like that's what I want from like this relationship with like me making clothes and, the person wearing these clothes. And it's funny because I feel like my wish for what I had done differently with this is not necessarily anything to do with the actual product or the design. Like, I feel very proud of it. I am sort of like, because I sent you a picture of the smallest model wearing this, but actually she represents one size of this, like, size spectrum that we do. We do up to 7X, and I have pictures of the 7X models. So if anything, I feel like, what would I change? I might have sent you like a different image. I think that Ray, this model, is like stunning. I love this pose. She did an incredible job. But I do also feel like one of the things that I feel most proud of is our size scale. And I
mm.
feel proud of how we can dress bodies within that size scale. Like, I think it's not enough to just size up the clothes. You kind of have to like reconfigure them to like consider how bodies change as they get bigger. So that's something I'm really proud of. And so I think if I would have changed anything, I might have sent you a different image to really showcase something that I'm even more proud of.
Oh, so good. Yeah, I wanted to touch on the sizing because I think that also adds a new level of complexity to the whole thing. And I totally understand that this image represents a more, the most commonly, or in our heads, the most common type of body. But what is great about your brand is that it also aligns with everything that you talked about before, which has to do with the type of illustration that you do, which is representing powerful women, your story of being surrounded by powerful women in your childhood, the topics and the values that you have, they have all to do with the brand that you built, where you are also inclusive of all the types of bodies. And that's also a big part of your identity as an artist and as a creator. Thank you so much for sharing this piece of work with
Yeah.
us. I would love to touch a little bit about on the fact that you moved to Berlin. I mentioned before we started the episode that I also moved countries. It's a really challenging experience in life. It can impact your life both positively and negatively, and impact your career as an artist. And I would love to hear, what was the decision behind moving countries first, knowing that you love LA and that you find in LA a place where you can, or in the West Coast. I don't know where you live, where you were living before moving to
You were
Berlin.
right. LA the whole time. Yeah.
LA. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what was the decision behind moving countries, and how this affected or impacted the work that you do, the way you live? I would love to hear a little bit about this.
I'm curious if we would have ever left LA if we hadn't had a child, my husband and I, but we had my daughter in 2021.
Mm,
And around that time, I don't know, I feel like the news is like quite LA focused. Actually, it's really shocking to me, like internationally, that we hear so much about the US here. But I don't know if you were following, but in 2021, school shootings were really ramping up.
mm,
And I felt like just the sheer volume of gun violence and like the message was clear that nothing was going to change. Nobody was interested. Nobody in power was interested in anything changing. And I had just had this baby and I was like, gone through all of this effort and just thinking about like, am I going to send this kid to school and like not be sure if they're going to come home
mm,
every day? And like, I don't want to like inflict that level of fear
mm,
upon her or myself. And initially we were like, do we move to Seattle? Because we were kind of like searching for the right thing. And then my mom had said, she was like, oh, I would move anywhere with you, even out of the country. And we were like, whoa, out of the country. And then my husband and I both made like presentations for one another of where we thought we should move.
mm.
And I was like very Scandinavia pilled, and he was like,
What are your
hear me.
options?
I was really gunning hard for Copenhagen or Stockholm. Those were
Hmm.
we had also talked about Finland, but I had, like I didn't know anybody in Finland and I don't know, like those were sort of like my big ones. And then my husband was like, yes, but, basically for all the reasons why you would think. It's like healthcare, safe for children, really egalitarian societies, like placing a lot of like emphasis on like gender equality. And my husband was like, I hear you. How about Berlin, Germany? And I was like, what? Because in my mind, Berlin is like really a party city. And that's what I had thought about it at the time. And I was like, I mean, sounds great, but not for like this stage in our lives. But he was like, it's the greenest city in terms of parks in Europe. It's like significantly cheaper than Scandinavia, free childcare or like greatly reduced childcare, really international, great public transit. And so he sort of convinced me and we came and visited for 3 weeks and we were like, okay, let's do it. And then got our ducks in a row for about a year and then moved.
That's great. And how do you feel that that impacted your life and also your work? I can imagine that for you moving the brand to Europe was, in a way starting over with new people who produces the items, perhaps a new team. How did that reconfigured here in Berlin?
I didn't have any like notion of how things would go with, clothing production. I knew, and I think everybody also, this is, like common knowledge that Portugal is really like a manufacturing hub in terms of clothing for the EU. But I really felt like, I was saying that it was really important to me to keep like a close eye on things and like have a little bit more of a close eye and just like not be overproducing. And I was like, wow, my greatest wish would be able to be just producing locally, so that I could like go and like
Mm,
talk and just have a real relationship. And honestly, producing in Europe has been so great. I love, like, it's a 2 women workshop here in Berlin. I love them. They're so wonderful and funny and thoughtful and communicative. And also, I feel like companies in Europe are way more interested in like ecologically friendly
mm,
practices and like will sign themselves up for certification or to be audited to just be able to have this certification to prove, hey, we're doing this in the way that we're all interested in moving forward. And that doesn't really exist in the US in the same way.
mm.
And I was really pleasantly surprised that people were like, we're on board, like there's so many great dead stock websites, like having a website instead of just like having to dig through a warehouse was like a revelation. And so it sort of feels like, oh, wow, I've like stepped into the digital age and can get things done versus like the culture in LA is very much like, people don't answer their phones or emails and you just have to go and be there in person and then like dig through things. So it has a charm of its own, but it's felt very pleasant to be here. Although things do move on their own timeline that I had to get used to being an American.
And it seems that things got easier for you in terms of producing the items and building the brand. What were the hard things of moving countries?
Well,
Or
the
the challenges,
language.
I would say, the things that are like, okay, that's a challenging story.
Yes, the language, of course. I already spoke ein bisschen Deutsch before I moved here.
Yeah.
But German, as you know, is like a difficult language to learn. And I'm at like I put in a lot of hours to be at like B1 level German, and I still feel like, like I can have the world's most basic conversations, and it, that feels frustrating, but it's really not that big of a deal. I think just learning new like methods of bureaucracy was really difficult. Like understanding what hoops to jump through. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like in the US, like the hoops suck, but they were the hoops I was familiar with. And then moving here, I was like, oh, this is like a whole new way, all of these new hoops I'm not used to, and just familiarizing yourself with like the bureaucracy, I think was the most difficult. But I feel like we sold everything we owned, like minus I think 2 or 3 suitcases, and so I would say it was easy to get rid of things, but then I feel like it surprised me moving to a new country and being like, ooh, I placed a lot more like personal emphasis on my physical goods than I had previously realized, and I felt a little bit of a loss of connection with like my surroundings. I think because I was like missing those things that I had in my life for a long time. What about you? What was the hardest part for you?
Oh yeah, I mean all the things that you mentioned, and I think after 15 years of living here, I still feel that this is something very present in my life, which has to do with understanding everything around me. I think there's a great blessing that has to do with moving countries, specifically to a country where it's not using your native language, which is that you can isolate pretty easily from what's happening around you. I can go on a bus and not paying attention to any conversation, and that's pretty easy for me to just block away from everything. And at the same time, it's hard for me to understand everything to the last detail of what's happening around me, and basically based on the language only. And it happens to me that when I go to back to Argentina, my home country, that I feel a little bit overwhelmed because I understand everything. I just get an overload of information. I just sit in a bar and I can overhear the conversations of everybody around me, and I cannot stop listening to all the things. So I think that is one of the elements. And also what you said about the nuance of a place, how things work. The most silly stuff, but where do you buy certain items? For instance, here you have no place where you could go and buy needles and threads and stuff to do stuff. Whereas back in my home country, you had specific stores, normally in like neighborhoods, where you could just go and buy this stuff. And here, like, I had to figure out where do I go get this stuff when I want to sew a t-shirt or something.
Totally.
So this little stuff is like what makes you feel lost for a very, very silly reason.
Yeah.
But I think also I always think that this is also a great blessing because it just opens up your mind to new possibilities of doing stuff. And
I agree.
I love that about just moving countries and going through the process of doing things differently. Because if you stay where you were, you wouldn't have gone through that process. You would have continued doing things the way you always did. And I love like the invitation to do things differently, even if in the beginning they feel uncomfortable. It's just such a great exercise for the mind as well. And especially for someone creative, like you and like me, that actually, lives from creativity, their job is to be creative. So, and And I wonder for you, because you had all these things going on in the last years. So you moved to Berlin 2.5 years ago. That comes with a lot of joy, but also a lot of burden of like finding a new place, accommodating your family in a new city, finding a new studio space, finding new people to work on your clothing brand. How do you keep your creative energy, or how do you keep things creative when you're also, dealing with logistics and with production and with money and with inventory and all that stuff? How do you go about this as a businesswoman as well?
That's a great question. And I sort of think I might thrive a little bit in chaos.
Mm.
So I feel like, for example, when I moved here and was like, things were so unfamiliar and, it wasn't allowed to work quite yet. Because like, I don't know with Argentina or how you did it, but with certain countries, like you could just move here and then you can apply for a visa when you've already moved here. And I had consulted a lawyer before I moved here and they were like, from our point of view, you qualify for the freelancer visa. So like you can just move to Germany and apply there. And so that is what I did. But it meant because a lot of people want to live here, it was really backed up in the Ausländerbehörde, the immigration office. So I couldn't work for like a good chunk of time. And I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to learn how to do chain stitch embroidery.
Great. This is
So
how it started. So
yes, exactly. And so I
yeah.
was like, oh, well, I can't do anything else with this time, really. So like, yeah, so that's what I did. I was like, I found a really wonderful mechanic in Turkey, in Istanbul, that works on these specialty machines, and they definitely exist in Germany. Like a lot of them were produced in Germany for years,
Yeah.
but I was really interested in this specialty mechanic because he clearly takes a lot of care. And I traveled to see him there and bought a machine from him and then flew back to Berlin with it. And then had like about 8 months to practice before I got my visa. So
That's amazing. I've seen on social media, and also you have a website for that. So you
yeah.
sort of build a little business out of this machine only. Tell us a little bit about what does this machine does, because I didn't know about this machine until I saw your project. What does this machine do, and what did you do with it?
So basically this machine is called a Chainstitch embroidery machine, and it only makes a type of embroidery stitch called a chain stitch. Does what it says on the tin, and it was developed in France in the late 1800s to be able to do like haute couture gowns, like embroidery on haute couture gowns. In the US, they're like very popularly known, or this style was used on baseball uniforms and like varsity jackets. So for like a lot of sports things.
I'm trying to find
And
an image of it so that we can show it. We can share the screen. I think it's a great, for those that are watching on YouTube. You can just check it out as well. If you allow me, I'm gonna share my
go
screen,
for it.
because there's also something really analog to it that I love.
Oh yeah. So it's like,
So
oh
here's the
yeah, there
thing,
we
right?
go. Oh,
This is
there
the
you go.
actual
Yeah.
machine.
So yeah, that's the actual machine. So my machine is from the late 1800s. It was like one of the original ones made in France.
Mm,
And it's controlled under the table by like essentially a joystick that's like, it's like a crank underneath the table. And that's how I draw with it. I'm drawing underneath the table with my hand like this.
mm,
And then this hand is just keeping it flat. It's not doing anything. So the hand you see there isn't doing anything except for keeping the thing flat. And they're really fun machines, but there's a huge learning curve with these machines. They're like very fussy. You kind of have to also be a mechanic for the machines to like be able to run them. So you have to be like very familiar with them and like, how to fix things, how to troubleshoot. Yeah. So it's super analog. You could just use like a regular foot pedal, like a vintage foot pedal with it, but I installed a motor on it. Most chain stitch embroiderers do like install a motor. I had a table custom made for it, which that
mm.
was probably my biggest, now that I'm thinking about it, my hardest transition thing was I was like, how do I do this? And I think there's someone in Munich that collects these machines, and then there's like a company that does these, but they kind of do it just for themselves. chain stitching, but otherwise there's really nobody in Germany to like turn to for this sort of thing. And so then finally I found like somebody who usually does like cabinet making, and I was like, please
Yay.
help me make this. And they were really confused about it, but it happened.
And how did you go about commercializing this? Because I know that you have been in a couple of events and fairs and all that stuff. So how did you go about finding a place to commercialize this skill that you developed?
First of all, I really relied on the SEO that came with my name being exactly what it is. So, like, if somebody is searching chain stitch embroidery Berlin, then like I'm going to pop up first. And I feel like in the past, I was not thinking about things in that way, and that would have seemed really lame to me. But I was like, I don't know, I'm 36 and I have a kid, and I was like, I live in a new country that I've never lived in before, and I was like, let me make things like a little easier on myself by literally just being who I am for this. And then also I did for the past 2 years at the Markthalle 9, which is like, for people who don't live in Berlin, it's like a big food hall with a bunch of different vendors. They do a Christmas market every year, and my friend, the first year that I did it, let me be at her booth, and I was not allowed to work in Germany still at that point. And so I was doing embroidery, and then just for donations to the Kaltebus, which is like, it's a bus that drives around and like picks up homeless people so that they don't freeze in the winter in Berlin, and like it provides them with services. And so I was doing Christmas embroidery for people for donations to this bus. And then the people at Markthalle 9 was like, reached out to me last year, and they were like, hey, do you want to do this again? And so I did it again. So now I feel like every year I'm just donating money to this like homeless outreach program for Christmas. And I did it, and then somebody from IKEA saw me there and got my card and then hired me to come stitch in store. That was amazing. And then a couple more times, and then I feel like from there it just kind of slowly started picking up. And now I was getting maybe like requests for events like every 2 or 3 months, and then now I'm probably getting requests for events like every month.
That's so amazing. I love it, because I think that oftentimes, and I like to listen to these stories and these steps, because I think that those listening are wondering, I love doing this, or I'm interested in that thing. So how do I make it, or how do I turn it into something that I can make money with? And it feels like a long stretch to work with IKEA. So, or most of us think that of that first. They think of like, I want to work with IKEA or Apple or Nike or whatever, and do a chain stitch for Nike caps, right?
Yeah.
and you want to start there, whereas what you did is to actually start small, go to that market, stitch caps and clothing for people who are just passing by, making yourself seen. So that was the first step, doing that event and being in that event. Then you were re-invited to that event. From that place, you met someone from IKEA who invited you to do this. And from that point on, then you got invited by other brands and other events. But it all starts with, those small steps that have to do with showing up and going to that market. And you also mentioned something important that is true. It sounds lame. And I remember that when I started speaking about SEO and marketing and all that stuff, sounded really
Sounds
lame.
lame, huh?
Yeah. But at the same time, it's really finding, the keywords and using your name as a way of making people find you. I think that I always say that if people can find you, they won't hire you because they don't even know that you exist.
Yeah, totally.
And starting there, like using SEO and making yourself seen through keywords, and then showing up for small events and starting there and scaling from that one thing. I think it's a great encouragement for those listening. It all starts there. It all starts small, and then you start growing it.
I think also, like, I wish I could remember who this quote is attributed to, but there's the quote like, be ready when the luck comes. Like, I think it's really important to say like, okay, maybe someday I'd like to work for this specific company, Nike, IKEA, whatever, but just like actually focusing on your craft so that when they come knocking, you are ready for that opportunity and you can really deliver something of quality that is like what they are looking for. I feel like especially earlier in my career, I just wasn't ready for some of the really cool opportunities I got. I just think it's so important to like really focus on being the best version of you and like your craft to be able to deliver for people when they come knocking. And
That's
also,
so,
I feel like there's so much. Sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah.
interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I just got so excited. But I do think that there is so much emphasis now on, getting paid what you're worth. And I
Mm.
think that's great. But I also think it's important to remember that there are so many people who need our help, like small businesses or organizations. And if you can like, like an outreach program or something, there's always something. Just being able to like lend support like with your craft in like some small way, I think goes really far. And I think
Mm.
people, like not necessarily doing it with the hope of being then discovered or something, but just, kind of like putting it out there. Like I'm using these skills. I have these skills. I'm a part of, this community. I live here. I think really goes far. And I think it also, then I think people kind of might take notice, that like, because you're doing something, for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is easier to work for people and that are, eye level with you at first, at least, than to work with big clients. As you said, you need to be ready for having that conversation with the IKEA creative director. You need to be ready at that professional level to have an eye to eye conversation with them. And to prepare for that, you first want to start by working with people that you are familiar with and that and that are giving you a small project. And all of these small projects will really train you to be the best version of yourself when you sit down with Mr. IKEA or Mrs. Apple or whatever it is that is gonna hire you down the road. But I think it's so important to remember that it starts with you showing up for that small step. I like to think that I am the owner of my own success, and it all starts with me,
Mm-hmm.
by you going to that event and doing that thing and showing up and just seeing how it resonates with people, whether people want to have their cap chain stitched or not. And then you can start building from there. As we come closer to the end of this episode, I would love to hear what are you excited about in this new context. First, you have moved countries, which I think must give you like a fresh start or the feeling of a fresh start. But when it comes to creativity and what's happening in the creative world right now, what are you excited about?
It's interesting because I feel like not for you to ask a positive question and me immediately turn it negative, but I think that we're in like such an interesting time right now in terms of like technology like being used as like a way to pull some jobs away, I think, from like graphic artists especially, and not just us, other people too. But I think what really has me excited is kind of doubling down, like when I see like artists sort of doubling down on being like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to do what I want then, because if I'm not getting hired for this, then I'm just going to make the kind of work that I really want to make. And I feel like I've seen like some more kind of like wacky things. And like I understand that that is bittersweet, because it's also like you want to get hired for this thing that you are good at. But I do think kind of like what you were saying, like putting yourself in a new position, like opens up new kind of like mental pathways or new things for you to potentially like focus on. And I don't know. I think I'm really curious to see how things pan out in the next 5 years. It will be interesting, that's for sure. And I do think that things will be a little bit more reliant on like individual engagement instead of like institutions.
Mm.
And I think in a way that can be really exciting. like not to downplay some of the anxiety that people can be feeling right now, but, like I grew up going to a lot of zine fests and like that was really my creative outlet and just art for art and creativity's sake. And I think that that can be a really exciting thing to come from
Oh, that's
where
great.
we're at.
And for those that are listening, that are perhaps young artists and designers who also feel overwhelmed by the amount of people doing creative work out there, by AI, by everything that is happening right now, which I feel that something from our time is that we are exposed to everything. That everything feel like life feels like a lot, and
That's true.
whatever
Yeah.
it is that you start, and that not only applies to artists and creatives. We feel that there's too much of that already. That if you want to start doing lettering, illustration, you feel that there's too many illustrators out there, that the market is oversaturated, that if you want to start Chainstitch, you already feel like there's a lot of people doing Chainstitch. So it feels like there's a lot of everything. What would you say to someone, to young designers that want to build something on their own terms, that they want to do the work that they really love and enjoy? What are some of the things that you would tell to them? What advice would you give them?
Like you were saying, like we have so much access to, so many different things, and you can see, oh my God, wow, there are thousands of designers, thousands of illustrators in the world, but there is nobody with like your specific perspective. If we're thinking about the two different tracks of, like illustration or design, but say that you're going down track two, which is, sort of like your commodification of like self into this, like I think really becoming familiar with who you are and what you like and what you bring to the table is really powerful because, there are thousands of designers and thousands of illustrators, but, there are also thousands of people who want to consume design and illustration.
Mm.
And, like your perspective might resonate with somebody more than like, say, my perspective would resonate with that same person. And I think it's really powerful to remember that like, it's not just about the 1,000 illustrators. Like we live on a planet with so many people, and I think your perspective is needed. And I think being true to yourself is really powerful in more ways than one. And I think like it really helps attract the kind of career and like viewership that you would want in the first place. So yeah, I think don't be intimidated that there are so many. I think if you really want it, then being yourself and being really aware of what you bring to the table.
That's so good. Becoming familiar with who you are. That seems like such a simple thing to do. At the same time,
It's so hard.
it's so
Yeah.
hard. It's so
Yeah.
hard. You spend years trying to figure out what is it that you want. And once you think you're figuring it out, it changes all over again, right? So and also I think that's also a good reminder that whatever it is that you think you are and whatever are the things that you discover, they will be ever changing. They will
Mm-hmm.
change throughout your career. The things that you want in the beginning of your career are not the same that you want, now that you're living in Germany and you have a kid or whatever, the vision that you had before perhaps changes over time, and that's totally fine. And that's also healthy that it does change. So thank you so
It's a
much
good
for that.
reminder for me too.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Thank you so much for that, Tuesday. At the end of the podcast, we always play a little game that is called Complete the Sentence. If I
Okay.
basically start the sentence and you complete it. Are you ready?
Yes.
Creativity means.
It's amazing how I feel like I just freeze up as soon as you ask that. Creativity means, I don't know, I think it can be really anything. I think creativity can be just a new way of looking at things,
Mm.
a new way of processing information.
I can't work without.
Headphones.
If I weren't doing art, I would be.
Practicing acupuncture, but I'm going to go to school for that this fall.
Oh, yeah, we didn't touch on that. Tell me a little bit
Yeah, it's
about that.
fine.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
I just feel like I always try to think about kind of like we were talking about, being honest with yourself and also like thinking about like, is the pathway that I've always been on the right pathway for me? Am I interested in kind of like opting out and doing something completely different? what could that look like for me? And I just thought, I think it's always positive to give yourself a lot of options in life. And I'm really interested in acupuncture. And I was also like, wow, this is a cool opportunity to give myself a different career path if I decide I want it. If I don't, like school in Europe is a lot cheaper than it is in the US. And so, okay, it's really not a big deal if I don't end up doing it at the end of school. Or if I do want to do it, great. Just giving myself options in this life.
That's so good. So, Chainstitch, acupuncture, clothing.
I
People, you
know,
can
it's
be
so
anything
much
you
when you say
want.
it.
You can be anything you want. And I love that. I love that message that you left for our listeners today. The last question is, right now is a really great time to.
Right now is a really great time to be honest with yourself and
Wow.
to check in with yourself. I think that is the most powerful thing you can do, is to really, instead of looking at things and seeing them for how you want things to function, looking at things and recognizing them for exactly where they're at, meeting things for where they're at instead of where you want them to be.
I love that. And I think to say as well, based on all the things that you talked about today, I think you're also embodying that very well.
Oh, that's so
You are,
nice.
yes, I love that you are also open to explore new things, no matter how challenging they may feel. Moving countries, starting something new, starting a new business from scratch here in Berlin, with this small machine that you got for yourself, learning a new skill. I think this is all part of conducting a creative life and being open to what life brings your way. So I love that message that you give to our listeners. And thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Tuesday, where can people follow you after this talk?
People can follow me on Instagram at Tuesday Bassen or at Tuesday of California. I mean, if you follow me at Tuesday Bassen, then it'll have all the other links.
Excellent. And I'm going to also add the link to Berlin Chainstitch and also your social media handles to our show notes so that people can find you. Thank you, Tuesday, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really an honor to be on here.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to the podcast. And I will see you on the next episode of Open Studio. Bye-bye.